So that was Infiltration Device by Craig MacArthur. Yeah, it's been a crazy couple weeks. This last week especially. Seems the death rate's going down, which is always good news. And it's pretty fucking crazy. It's been, 10,000 attributed deaths this week to COVID-19. And it's been one of those things that I never really trust the numbers they give anyway, because, lying the statistics is a whole field in and of itself. But at least the rates in Europe are going down, so hopefully life can come back to normal for a bit this summer. You can start living like civilized folk again, instead of dwelling in our techno caves. Yeah. Well, this week's been fun, for me especially, because I've been having one of those existential crises, but less crisis, more fun time, you know? Like, I guess it started probably last Sunday. I came to a discovery that probably in simulation, like using empirical physics, because I was observing what could only be described as relativistic effects in our normal space-time, right? Things were moving slower than they should be. Time wasn't moving right. Well, time always seems to be weird around me, but that's a whole other field of discussion. So, the essential moment came to me when I was watching an apple in the air. And I like to play these games with things where I toss them around. Then I started realizing, wait a minute, I've been tossing things around in the air so often that I'd like to pick them out of the air at the apex of the toss, because it's always moving on what's called a parabolic curve. And the way it's happening is like things should be hanging in the air at the top of a curve like that. They should go up and go down. And that's when it clicked. Wait a fucking minute. That should be impossible. Like, that should really fucking be impossible. And it's like, well, fuck. It's the only thing that made sense about it. The simulated reality, Because what happens when something's approaching an apex like that, you're multiplying numbers by its x position, its y position, and its z position. And as you're moving along a curve like that in 3 dimensions, it's a 2-dimensional arc in 3 dimensions. You're multiplying by close to 0 at the top of that arc. But the fun thing I like to do is I like to throw in a lot of spin into these things, so it can be rolling across 1 dimension or 2 dimensions. And I usually like to throw these things in as complicated a spin as possible. And that's when it clicked, like, at the apex of these turns, right? The object is spinning so fast and in such a complicated way that the mechanics of our reality can't quite keep up with the local time of the object and my secondary reference. So it looks like it slows down at the top of the arc, which should be impossible, unless we're already moving close enough to the speed of light. They can start seeing that kind of warping, or in a simulation. And it's that sort of thing. You always look for glitches in the Matrix, but you never really expect to find them, And with that came a whole host of questions. Like, what's real? Am I real? Is my mind real? What does it mean if the mind is simulated? Do we have free will? What does that mean for the whole catastrophe around us? And it's a fun thought experiment. But I can see how that would freak some people out, like monstrously. Because who wants to be confronted with the knowledge that everything they do may be up to the deletion of somebody else, something else? But I've been enjoying it though, because I also came to a fun moment this week where, yeah, because I've lived my life in a way where I can, let's just see around the corners in a temporal sense, right? Or more like I've lived my life 1,000 times already. Like, imagine if not just one day was Groundhog's Day, but your entire life. It's kind of what it's like in my head. Like, paths seem relived, whole careers, whole relationships. I mean, sometimes it's fun, but I try to avoid walking the same path twice, 3 times, 4 times. Hmm. And it's hard when you see your mistakes and still can't help but make them again, or deciding whether something is a mistake while you know the costs. And this all came with this idea of how to live with oneself if you know that your reality isn't real, in a sense, right? Like, do you just walk the path prescribed to you? Is your then reaction to the fact that it isn't real part of your prescribed plan? This is a test to see what we're like once we figure out that it's a game. Because, I mean, part of what makes this lifetime unique for me is that I'm actually being communicative about all this that I'm experiencing. Though in a few versions of this, actually start this social experiment with this, recording thing much sooner in different ways, in different versions where I show myself more. And they're interesting. But I gotta say, this version's been my most fun yet. Especially with the visuals. Those are my favorites so far. So today's is inspired by this idea of freedom and choice. It's 2 prescribed paths. One's random, one's ordered, one's slow, one fast. I'm not saying which is which for both categories, but maybe if you watch it long enough, you'll figure that one out yourself. It's sort of like the issues that I'm seeing now. Really. Sure, we may have day-to-day choices, but are the big ones really ours to make? Are the people we form relationships with, the people we choose to make our friends, those choices or those inevitabilities? Like, how many of our friends were people that just happened to sit next to us in whatever event we were at, classroom, things like that. And then the idea of the power of love, but like in a very literal sense, right? Because there's something uniquely powerful about relationships. that they have the power to create new life, create ripples in time, change people's lives that don't even come close to you, just being around an energy that a couple can give off. And there are those of us that try to fall towards one or the other. Then those of us that just don't fit. Yeah. And I guess part of the reason why this is coming to my head is because today I had the pleasure of watching this movie, The Adjustment Bureau, with Matt Damon. And, oh my god, I'm forgetting the lady's name. But it's a book by Philip K. Dick. Which if I'd known... her name is Emily Blunt. I remember it was a funny name like that. But it's a book by Philip K. Dick. One of my favorite authors of all time. And it's a love story, but it's a love that's been, let's say, forbidden by the powers that be. And I'm not going to spoil it for you, but it's a love story. And so that idea kind of stuck with me, Because I've had situations where I've met people, multiple people at this point, lovely, brilliant, but I literally see our future together. Like, not imagine, but see. Like, it's not as fun when you see it, Then when you see the goods and the bad, how it turns out really bad sometimes. You, or I at least, do what I can to avoid the worst of it. For both our sake. Hoping to find somebody whose future melds in a healthy way. Then I wonder, does everybody have this sort of thing with them? Can they always see their futures and just choose to ignore it? Because I know myself. I know why things turn out the way they do. But I often wonder if people see it and choose to ignore it and just go with their guts and feelings like, oh no, it can't be. And it's one of these things, right? The quality of our lives and the quality of our futures is dependent on our choices. When we choose to ignore the advice of our, let's say, inner selves or premonitionary visions, what hope do we have of making the right choice if we can't even follow those? Because even now, right, I try to use these premonitions for investing purposes, and they're accurate to a point of it being creepy. It's the sort of thing where I don't want to exploit just yet. So I still want to, build a decent data set, make sure that I know when and how it's most likely to be accurate, that sort of thing. Like, for instance, this most recent Bitcoin drop and jump, right? It dropped to like $4,300 or something like that for one Bitcoin. It's gone up to about 7,700 recently. And in my head, I was like, yeah, it's gonna go back up, but I don't want to be involved in it right now because I have too much further work I want to do. So I'll just sit back and watch it to see if my vision is confirmed. Because I had another vision later, where after this I invest in it again, but then it drops on me. Not in a painful way, but enough that I still don't want to invest until I know the second drop happens. So it's little things like that, right? And earlier on, I was making predictions on coins, and I was able to get to an 80% accuracy rate. But the thing is that because the markets are chaotic things, participating in the market changes how the market behaves. So with the 80% accuracy, you can make a decent profit, but when you're trying to make bigger profits, I would start further out and start making predictions at 60% confidence intervals, and those are pretty much chance at that point. And things worked out at the same rate, but when things go bad, they go really bad. So, stick to what you know, stick to what works. Then that same sort of logic breaks when you're trying to figure something out as complicated as other people. Like, knowing what works gets you stuck in a rut. But then if the game is for the continuance of the human race or something that, fucking overzealously lofty, what do you do about that, I mean, sure, it's like your worth determines if you're even going to consider having kids. And then over this choice span of the entire human species, for all making terrible choices, what does that mean for the next generation? And what happens when our choices are taken from us, right? So that's one thing I've noticed about dating apps. It's the illusion of choice a lot of the time. Now, I guess, you can make choices. I mean, you have to. You have to click whether you want to swipe right or swipe left on someone. But also, they have a history of your behavior. So, let's say your first 100 people they put in front of you, they get a standard statistical idea of how often you swipe right or left. I think the numbers are like 80% of guys swipe yes on 80% of women, while 80% of women swipe no on 80% of guys. So when you calculate that interval of who swipes yes on whom, it becomes a fun game of channeling potential relationships, predicting interests, seeing what keywords people are most likely to, or picture signals, like if there's a dog, if there's muscles, if there's a car, that sort of thing. And it gets really creepy at a point. Because you can also predict things like the rate of autoimmune disorders, cancers, diabetes, high blood pressure, mental illnesses, based on, the words people put in their profiles, their body mass index in the pictures, whether they have pets or not, whether they exercise or not, their age, their height, all these sorts of things. And the whole world of big data becomes this freaking massive predictability. And then the idea of like preset histories comes to mind. Like, how far back do you really remember? Or could your memories just be implanted up to now? Would you be able to tell if, as you went to sleep tonight, somebody were to go in and change your entire perception of reality, but because you're living in quarantine, you had no idea it happened, you're just living your life? And that would make a situation like this, where contact between people has been limited to such a degree, a perfect opportunity to start some fuckery, messing with human minds. But, that's just fun thought experiments that I do, especially when free will is concerned. So, back to the question. Is this reality real? I don't think it matters. And I'll tell you why. If it was real, would we act any differently? I don't think so. because it doesn't make a lick of difference if you know it's real or not, whether you want to do something or not. But then the question is, if what you want is what you want or what you've been programmed to want, that's when things get iffy. Like, how much of your mind is your own? How much of your memories are actual memories or just implanted subroutines? And then who amongst us isn't a subroutine? And are they even amongst us, those that aren't? And that's the funnest part of this whole thing, because I've been studying the human brain and the idea of the collective unconscious, right? It makes sense for, a grand programmer in the sky, so to speak, to create, the human subroutine, the human idea, the human form, right? The form of the psyche. And beneath that is a layer of symbology that makes it easy to process what a human would likely do, but doesn't quite get to the evolutionary depth of why they do what they do. And that's when things get interesting, right? Like, can you know yourself if you don't know why you do things, but you just do them, right? Out of habit. And then what would make a simulated human different from a real human? Is it that habits have a reason behind them? Every day you make the same decision because you're in the exact same place, so the decision is forced on you? And then that makes this reality seem even more fake, because I know people don't think through their decisions this way. I know they just go through the motions. People talk about it every day, just going through the motions. And then having those motions disrupted in such a powerful way as this virus has done would make sense as to why glitches in the matrix start being more obvious. But it's a fun thing. Because, in theory, then, if we do live in the matrix, if we do, what more could we do with it? Could we rewrite the laws of physics for ourselves locally? Could we go all flying in the sky like Neo? Because funnily enough, I've read enough stories about this stuff to hint that it's possible, but the mechanisms for this become impossible if physics work the way we think they do. But now physics are ours to play with as we choose. And if we're given something like root access to reality, what does that mean for us? And I think this is where Brett Weinstein is wondering about what happens when we unlock the source code to ourselves. Because within it, we have to unlock the source code to space-time itself. As we exist within space-time. And there's this whole idea in Masonic thinking that man is the measure of all things. And the measure of space and time. It's kind of crazy. The human life, single generation. Depending on how you count it, it's 100 years or 20 years. The time it takes to be reproductively viable to produce another generation, or the time it takes to live life and die, having the entire population replaced in the meantime. I know there's a specific word for it, but I forget. I'll look it up one of these days. But then the idea of what do I want just really stuck in my mind, right? Well, partly because I was also listening to this audiobook about self-control. And I got stuck at this part where it asks you to write down what it is that you want. I mean, part of me doesn't really want anything. My satisfaction is kind of a frustration I've had. Because I know I could be happy with anything. It's a problem when, you can maintain and control your mental states to the point that, you're unbothered, unmoved, a single pillar in a storm sort of situation. Do I want then things for other people? It's like what happens when you give a guy a wish, 5 wishes, 3 wishes, whatever. And they're like, I don't really want anything. He must want something. I don't know. Let's see. Okay, here's a nice couch. Yay, okay, I'm done. I'm just gonna sit there. Yeah, I'm good. Nothing else? What would you like? I don't know, this is your question. It's things like that bother me. And sometimes I guess some people would describe that as being depressed. A lack of want, a lack of drive. But it's not like I'm undriven, right? I work to achieve greater goals, but dispassionately. It can be kind of infuriating for others, myself included, because when you have things that everybody always claims to want, and it's kind of meaningless to you, what do you do with it? Because, part of me wants to just give it all away. But I know that doesn't fix the problem. It just removes the responsibility from myself. And then I'm stuck in a place where you don't have to build yourself back up. It's a messy situation. Because what if you want something later on? Or, like, the situation, what if you find somebody that makes you want again? Makes you, yeah. It's this puzzle. But the nice thing about being in this situation, wanting to want rather than wanting, that you can kind of decide what you want to want, particularly when you feel that reality is a vast MMORPG. You choose the roles you want to play. You choose how you want to play your role. Each man's a player. 7 parts. Born to die. But it's a fun game. You choose to live passionately. Burn out like a mayfly, seeking the sun in a candle flame. Do you take the turtle's route? That's been another question, right? Because I've seen futures where massive human life extension becomes the norm, like as the whole species. It's a beautiful future. I've seen cities made out of, how to describe it, glass that looks like coral. They're surrounded by airships and flying cars that look like fish. Like, the beauty of a coral reef created with technology in the air, like the sea. It's unbelievable. These were things that I only thought were dreams for a while, but as I live longer, I start to see them as potential realities. Which begs the question then, which realities are worth having? Because even that reality had its own downsides. It's a false utopia. People felt they were given all they needed, so they didn't do anything. The art suffered, the music suffered, everything started sounding the same, everything started feeling the same. Diversity became homogeneity. What made it special, what inspired the growth of such a beautiful state became its own undoing. Those that wanted to preserve the chaos came against those that wanted to seek union with each other. And of course they clash. I mean, that's the very situation we're caught in now politically. The conservatives versus the liberals get taken to an extreme. When technology enters the mind, right? And the sense of self becomes an option. Like, that's when things get really dangerous. People being able to choose whether or not they want to be part of a hive mind. And then having to contend in a reality where those that succumb to the hive mind are that much more effective, that much more economically viable, much more powerful. But then, do they ever have the choice to leave the hive mind? Will they ever even want to leave the hive mind once they've joined? It's a fun question. And is it truly a choice? If that's the only way to be successful, if that's the only way to be reproductively viable in society. Because, and that's sort of a hive mind scenario, right? Every human being is predictable. You chart their course for them. They follow the path. And then they fit in where they fit in. And if they don't, you're gotten rid of by necessity to preserve the system. But then that's another question then. How do you build a system capable enough to create new paths for people that don't fit? Do you just tell them to go be artists? Go art for us. Put your art on our sleeves. You'll die lonely and miserable. But at least your suffering will be our pleasure. What right does the system have to decide who gets to be the starving artist? Then that's pretty much the economy, isn't it? Whether it's a choice made by the group unconscious, the selective economic pressures, society choosing, hey, we don't fuck with you because, fuck your politics. Or a few small hands at the top. There's always somebody making a choice. Or something making a choice for you. But I don't know. I don't know what's making the choice, rather. So now, come back to this question of, are we in the base reality? And a lot of the time, like, the people deal with this, they come to the question of, well, it's highly, if this is the base reality, what would stop us from then making more simulations? Okay, true. And wouldn't those simulations, wouldn't we want to run, 5, 10, 50, 100 of them? So that automatically makes non-base realities exponentially more likely to be in existence than base realities. And because the anthropic principle, once you have one universe that creates intelligent life, that universe will then be exponentially more likely to create ancestor simulations or simulate other realities, just for shits and giggles. And is the simulated reality any less real than the real reality? Well, it's like asking if one infinity is bigger than another infinity. And in some cases, there's that whole Aleph null situation where you can say you have countable infinities and uncountable infinities, but they're still infinite. They reach no end. Having a qualification of greater or less real is meaningless. And the question of their existence, right? What is the time depth of our reality? Will this universe actually last a full 10 billion years? Or can they pull the plug on us at any moment in time? How can we know what the capabilities are over our reality? How can we know what can be changed against our knowledge, against our will? So, that's one of my questions, but my answer has been to see order and randomness, right? Because if that's the situation, then the invisible hand of the coder of our reality would be in the random things. The flips of coins, the way raindrops fall, the way weather patterns move, especially unpredictably. Like, for instance, this last week or so, the weather reports have all been wrong by a few degrees every day. And I'm pretty sure it's just because there aren't cars on the road out the way they used to be. And the weather models were all built from the 1950s onward to have massive numbers of cars on the road spewing out hot gas. So that moderate cooling, that we've had over these last, how many months now? Let's say 2 months. Changes the weather patterns considerably enough that if we had a situation like, say, hurricane season, that is supposedly going to be one of the biggest ones we've ever had, now has a cooler atmosphere with less water vapor because there's less fossil fuel being burnt. Does that not invalidate those predictions? But then you have to run that shit through supercomputers to confirm. And I doubt the scientists the meteorologists rather, working on this, have taken the time to consider all this. Because, they're all worried about the world ending. No one's really paying attention to the weather. Which comes to a second point. I keep noticing more and more alien activity. Like, just straight up flying things in the sky. Weird things that we haven't been able to see. And I know I talked about it a little bit, but they seem to be happening more frequently. And particularly when we're not paying attention to the skies anymore because everybody's stuck inside. I just find it kind of humorous. And given that it's the first day of Ramadan, people have to monitor the skies to find the moon, or the new moon, the shadow of the new moon. And it's one of these fun things where I'm wondering if we're going to get reports of people finding things in the sky. But if that's the case, right, if they're aliens watching us, if they are the programmers, or, they're just observing the program that they wrote, they're observing it as holograms, right? What if we're like the Sims, 6-dimensional creatures create a 5-dimensional world, and they just watch the different branching pathways we can take, and they're fascinated by it, because why wouldn't you? That shit's cool. Then us in our 3-dimensional existence create 2-dimensional games, and then we feel like, we're the real reality, while they, in that 2-dimensional game rather, have that much shallower sense of existence, because, you still have bots in your games. They have limited lives, they have limited perception. Some of them are born and die, but very few of them ever are. Like, I was just reading about the Radiant AI system in Skyrim, where the bots in the game were given different amounts of free will, But the problem is that the more free will they were given, the more they'd fuck the game up for the players. Like, you'd have bears ransacking through town, zombies doing the exact same thing, like thieves stealing from people and getting killed by guards all the time, throwing the continuity of the game up. So the programmers had to limit the freedoms of the players to keep the game playable. And the question becomes, who are the players in this reality if it is a game? Do the players even know that they're players? Could that be part of the game that you don't know if you're the player or not? And then would the game's purpose be to live a normal life or to be exceptional in this small world? Like, think about that. Like, if you're a nigh omniscient being, what would be more fun than feeling what it's like to muddle around, not knowing, figuring it out for yourself? And that becomes this whole, fun, deep existential problem now. Because then, what happens after you die? If everybody's a player, and you come out of it and you're like, whoa, that was a fun ride. Yeah, man. And you lose your, human individuality to rejoin up the sixth dimensional consciousness that is your soul. Like, how much of this really matters in the end? Could what you do that matters only be what impacts those sixth dimensional beings? The 6D version of yourself? How many of them are there? Is it just one? Or is it a colony of them? Colonies of us producing the personality types that we see. Because I've also noticed this, right? People seem to fall into different classes, but like, how do I put this? Like, I feel like I've seen the same person again and again, but in different forms, The same person will have a dark skin, light skin, pale skin, that sort of thing. It's like, I mean, I guess it's part of the whole genetic lottery thing, like the mix and matching of traits. But then once you see the same, outward manifestation of somebody, and then they have a similar personality too, it gets unnerving when the only thing that's different about them is really the situation that they're in. Like, the same desires, same wants, same intonation, same laughs, even. Just different context. And, first it's a nature versus nurture thing. And then there's a deeper question of if it's not really the genetics making this up, and it's not really the context that the person is living in creating this issue. Is there a difference in soul? Right? Like, are twins of the same soul? Can some identical twins have different souls? Can the same soul be reborn within, the same lifetime? And the Buddhists say, yeah, like you can meet your own self in a soul sense. Some people say those are your soulmates, but sometimes I wonder if it's not the opposite. And then, like, is there a purpose to the game? Becomes the question. Or is it just for enjoyment? I forget who made this story. It's called The Egg, right? The essential premise of it is that Earth life is a place where we develop to become, worthwhile of developing realities of our own. And this is a training ground for it. And something, the ayahuasca experience seems to support this idea, right? Higher dimensional beings come to us laughing, playing, saying, yeah, just enjoy, be married, make beautiful things, connect with people, speak and make it be. Do as you wish, feed love into the reality that you're in, and watch it blossom into beauty. Then, right, there comes the issue of sentience and food and survival, like the fear of death motivating our action more than the love of life. Do we eat meat because we love the taste of it? In part, for sure. Do we just love the fact that it's more sustaining than the plants, the breads, even how much of their minds were simulated? Because, like, another video I saw today was of an octopus, right? Who was freed by this guy. And after recovering, this octopus was trapped on a beach. Somebody picks it up, puts it in the water. The octopus recovers, crawls up to the person, puts a tentacle on their boot for a while, and then floats away. And it was one of these touching moments that, wow, the octopus was probably definitely sentient. But then the thing about octopodes, or however the multiple of them is called, is that they don't have cultural learning the way we do. They don't get raised. Actually, that's the funny thing. They may get raised, but we don't understand it. Because they live in little translucent eggs, and they watch their parents through those eggs. So they could be learning. That would be a fascinating fractal learning method, where they learn enough in such a short period of time to be able to navigate reality. But I mean, when you're camouflaged and you're perfect, and all you need to do is be able to recognize what food is, life is much simpler. Like, what makes humanity so capable is how incapable we are. So we're forced to adapt. The octopus is made perfect for its environment. It can hide, it can swim, it can shapeshift. Why does it need to learn? It has everything it needs, naturally. And it reproduces in the thousands, whereas we can only carry 1 or 2 children at once. And the question is, if every creature has free will, then we're all playing without limited moveset. What does it mean for those that make new moves that other people can play with? Unlock the levels of the game for others, right? Because, there's those that create for the sake of it, and there are those that create for others. The inventor class is something very weird to me. Because without people like Edison and Tesla, right? Or Henry Ford, or the Wright brothers. I mean, yes, there were others approaching these things, but the fact that there's a whole class of people expanding the moveset for all of us constantly. It's just odd to me, because when I look at their lives, they sacrifice themselves. And it's this whole idea of martyrdom for the sake of the species just becomes hilarious to me. Like, I wonder, if we're worth it. Like, what's the point of building a castle in the sky if people are just gonna burn it down? Not for any decent reason, not because it poses a threat, but because it's blasphemous, or it could pose a potential threat, So they launch a preemptive strike. What does it mean then to want to build a castle in the sky? Ever since I was young, I always wanted to go back to space, and I emphasized the back. Like gravity never felt right. But I guess it goes. I mean, it's kind of bound to be the truth when your first memory is floating. That's the thing. Like the octopus would be much better suited to living in a zero-G environment. I mean, it already does in the water where it's neutrally buoyant. And the thing that makes humans so human is that we overcome situations that we're not adapted to naturally. And that's how we've survived and thrived on Earth. And I think it's what'll force us to thrive in space. This is so hostile to us. The more hostile the environment, the more we thrive there. Like we have desert cities. Like the entire Egyptian civilization was hugged up, surrounded by desert, living off of a single lifeline of the Nile River. As long as we have a source of water and a stable atmosphere and food, we're good. And then everything else that we build around it is just cake. So, like my will has been to build a city in the sky for shits and giggles so we can explore deep space. It's a simple wish. I watched too much Star Trek as a kid. Star Wars, Stargate. I lived for the stars. So then the question is that something I really wanted, or is that something I was programmed to want? And was that programmed desire then meant for other people, and then I don't partake of it? It feels shitty to get cheated out of your own dream. But then, it's the story of Moses, right? Who, because of some small transgression, never got to see Jerusalem. But then, in another sense, he never got to partake, or never was forced to partake in the massacre. His people were forced to, or encouraged to, elicit upon the Canaanites. Yeah, shit gets biblical fast with this sort of thing. But what are you to do? Once the fate of humanity is on the table, I mean, there's really no end to the justifications people can make. This is the other problem, right? I mean, that's what drove the Nazis to do their crazy thing. Saving the human race. And I feel like it's the same sort of thinking that goes into the modern eugenicists who claim to be saving us to protect the environment, sacrificing humans to save animals. Well, the funny thing is that global warming is making the oceans much more livable for things like octopuses and squid, who are the more intelligent species, right? So it seems the intelligent species seem to thrive in adversity. So the harder we make life on Earth, the more we'll thrive by that logic. Like, even after the last, let's say, super catastrophe, where 90% of humanity died, what was left was green fields, unpopulated land that we could explore and into. So Earth would have been an Eden after the cataclysm. And that's when history began. A global garden. With so few people, there was no reason to fight for a good 3,000 to 5,000 years. So war was forgotten until the cold came back, and then the growing season shrank. People started to starve again. People had to go down from their high hills where the farmland used to be, plentiful for at least a few hundred years. Go down south to see who was left. Go down the mountain, start killing everybody they could because they needed to eat. So that becomes the issue. Like, if that's just the prime driver of evolution, and let's say our 4 to 6 dimensional overseers created the system to engineer the perfect form for, if not themselves, just to see what the progression of life is like in this state, to be able to encompass something of a full psyche as their own. Because I could see that being the point, because even humans want to digitize ourselves, encode our souls into computers, right? And that's 2 dimensions at a point, yeah. The binary system, one way to describe a 2-dimensional system, right? Or 1-dimensional if you want to count it as a number line, but still, it's a dimensional reduction of intelligence. And if that's the full scope of the game, if some 60 entities want to encode into 5D, to 4D, to 3D, and then us into 2D, and 1D, and then eventually the point, particle, the singularity. What does that mean for the species once it's done? Does the game reset? Do we ever get to space? Do we ever need to get to space? If once you hit the singularity point, you can warp reality to be as you wish. Like, you see, it becomes a whole mess. It defeats the purpose of having so much. But then the question is, how much is it really out there? How big is our pen? Because in theory, if this is a simulated world, they can't simulate everything. And in fact, it makes more sense. There's less space. So then the dimensions and construction of our reality become questionable. Because you could have a situation where the literal world is flat. But then there's a shift that happens as you reach higher scales where the curvature is forced. So then these become things that we have to test. And whether or not our devices for measuring these things would be able to find these results. Because the only reason I was able to find my glitch in the matrix is because I'd been observing it for years at a time, so I knew the behaviors of these things in these conditions. And there's no telling whether or not it'll get patched, because I'm even talking about it now in public. But I guess you should all find your own. I'd love to hear if you find new ones, because it's been pretty fun for me. Alright, in some ways. Peace out.